The day they fired me, the sun looked gentle through the window. They called me into a small room with soft chairs and hard faces. They used polite words. Restructuring, unfortunate timing, nothing personal. It was so personal that I could taste it. I didn't argue. Some battles ask you to lose your soul to win a salary. I folded the paper, thanked them in a voice so calm it scared me, and left my badge on the desk like a tired bird. My feet knew the hallway. They carried me out before the tears came. Outside, the air felt larger. The parking lot was a blank page. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, and let the silence hold me. Part of me wanted to call someone and tell everything. A wiser part wanted to vanish before the story could harden into pity. I chose to vanish. Sometimes the bravest thing is to become quiet and listen to your life. I drove to the old park near the river. The path was lined with trees that returned with new green each season. I walked without purpose, eyes on the water, counting small boats drifting past. With each step, I set down the urge to explain, the burden of proving, the need to be seen by people who never looked. My shoes rubbed a blister, an honest pain. I did not post about it. I did not send out a brave announcement with a smiling photo. I let my phone go dark and let the river be my witness. People say you must fight back immediately, shout your truth, gather defenders. There is another way, older, slower, and for some of us the only way that feels like home. You walk away and let time salt the wound until it is clean. By evening, the shock wore off, and a steady anger arrived. Protect what remains. I made a simple dinner, washed each dish with care, and opened a notebook that had been waiting on my bedside table for months. On the first page, I wrote the date and a sentence. I am not finished. The words looked small but sure, like seedlings. For the next few days, I became a student of my own silence. Morning walks replaced morning meetings. I mended a button, tightened a hinge, watered my plants with the attention I once gave to reports. The world did not collapse when I missed a deadline. The sky did not fall because I replied late to an email. My breath found a rhythm that felt like mine. But silence is not empty. In the quiet, I remembered training a new hire who later took credit for work we built. I remembered a meeting where a joke slid across the table like oil, and I laughed because I was tired of being the only one who didn't. I remembered building a system that saved money and time, and how my manager called it luck. I am old enough to know that luck is a word used when people don't want to say skill. The more I remembered, the less I wanted to shout. Shouting would have made me a character in their story. I wanted to be the author of my own, so I made a quiet plan. I listed what I had, not what I lost. Relationships with clients who trusted my name. Folders of notes. A habit of showing up early. A map of where the missing pieces fell. I listed the truths that could be told without hatred. I promised myself not to turn hard. I would turn clear. One afternoon, I opened an old box in the hall closet and found a stack of thank you cards from people whose projects I had guided. Their handwriting looked like small bridges across doubt. I lined them on the kitchen table and read them aloud, letting my voice learn the shape of gratitude again. The kettle boiled. I poured tea and tasted steadiness. There is power in not needing to be seen. When you stop chasing eyes, you start catching signals. In my quiet days, small signals came. A former colleague sent me a photo of a whiteboard I had filled last spring. Another sent a confused message about a meeting that didn't add up. No one said the thing out loud. But in offices, certain shapes repeat. A smile too wide, a story that shifts, a credit that moves like a shadow. I did not push. I listened. I took notes. At night, I practiced telling the truth in simple words. I would stand by the window and speak to the glass, letting the sentences be clean and unafraid. Not to accuse, not to scorch, to name. I imagined being asked and answering without flinching. I imagined a table, a few chairs, and a woman who would not perform sorrow just to be believed. I promised myself to keep my palms open. On the 7th day, I did something small that changed everything. I wrote one short email. It had no adjectives, no anger, no ornaments. It was not addressed to the people who fired me. It was addressed to someone whose attention is worth more than applause. I read it 3 times, took a breath, and clicked send. Then I closed the laptop, set my tea on the windowsill, and watched the last light slip behind the houses. I told myself that if nothing came of it, I would still be okay. I told myself to sleep. Even in sleep, The quiet worked on me, sanding away noise, leaving the grain. In the morning, an answer was waiting. The subject line was brief. The sender's name was one I had not spoken in years. My hands shook, not from fear but from recognition. The world might not have noticed I vanished. I breathed once, but someone had been watching, and what they wrote would turn my quiet into a tide. When I saw that name in my inbox, my breath caught like fabric on a nail. It was Elaine Hart, my old regional director, the one who had left the company 2 years before me. She was known for fairness in a place that had forgotten what fairness sounded like. Her email was only 3 sentences long. Heard what happened. Don't vanish completely. Call me when you can. I stared at the screen. I had sworn not to reach back, yet something in her words felt like a rope thrown into fog. I made tea, wrapped my hands around the mug, and thought of the version of myself that used to schedule meetings with her at 8 a.m., both of us early birds before the noise began. I dialed her number before I could talk myself out of it. Her voice came through warm and slightly breathless. You always land on your feet, she said, but I think you've landed somewhere quiet. I told her I had. She laughed softly. Good. Quiet is where truth grows roots. We spoke for 20 minutes about nothing and everything. She didn't ask for gossip. She asked about the garden, the books, the sleep. Before hanging up, she said, keep notes, keep calm, and remember, sometimes the storm clears when the wind runs out of lies. Then she added, you might get a call from someone else soon. That sentence sat in my mind like a candle burning low. Someone else. I wondered who still remembered me beyond the polite condolences of professional loss. The following week moved slowly. I woke each morning to the same window light, brewed coffee, wrote in my notebook. I began labeling my pages by weather rather than date. Tuesday, rain. Thursday, thin sun. It made the passing days feel less like a countdown and more like a collection of moments worth keeping. I started volunteering at the library on Thursdays. The smell of paper and quiet footsteps steadied me. Older women came to return books and stayed to talk about recipes or grandchildren. I listened. Their stories were stitched with loss and repair, proof that life refills itself when given patience. One woman said, we don't disappear, dear. We just turn the light low until our eyes adjust. I wrote that down. Being invisible taught me the luxury of watching without being watched. I could walk into a cafe, order a coffee, sit by the window, and no one expected anything from me. My value no longer hung from an ID badge or an email signature. I felt both smaller and freer, but freedom has its echo. There were moments at night when silence turned sharp, when I missed the small dramas of office life, the coffee machine chatter, the sound of printers spitting out paper, the hum of belonging. I'd remind myself that belonging shouldn't require erasing oneself. One afternoon, while sorting returned books, I found an envelope tucked between the pages of a history novel. It had no name, only the words, "To whoever needs courage today." Inside was a single line written in a woman's looping script. Truth travels slower than gossip, but it travels further. I smiled because it felt addressed to me. That evening, as rain tapped the windows, I opened my old laptop again. I reread Elaine's email and decided to update my notes, not with complaints, but with clarity. I wrote down each event as if I were a journalist observing, not a victim reliving. Names, dates, outcomes, tone of voice, the silence after each meeting. Facts, not fury. The act itself was calming. My story was becoming organized, not explosive. In the space between sentences, I noticed patterns. How certain approvals happened after certain dinners. How data shifted right before quarterly reviews. It was like tracing threads on a tapestry only visible when you step back. One night, while writing, I heard a knock at the door. My neighbor, Mr. Hayes, stood holding a small package. "Delivered to me by mistake," he said. "Looks important." The label had my name but no return address. Inside was a slim flash drive in a plastic sleeve. No note, no explanation. Just a small device that hummed of secrets. I didn't plug it in immediately. Instead, I placed it on my desk and made another cup of tea. I've learned that curiosity needs discipline. When I finally opened it, a single folder appeared on the screen labeled Archives 2021. Inside were scanned copies of reports I had written, but with someone else's name on the cover pages. My stomach tightened. Each document carried my phrasing, my formatting, even my spelling quirks. Whoever sent it wanted me to see this. For a moment, I felt the old heat of injustice rising again. The kind that burns reason into ash. But then I breathed out and remembered Elaine's voice. Keep calm. I backed up the files, labeled them neatly, and stored a copy in cloud space. No confrontation, no revenge, just preservation. Truth deserves to be safe. That night I couldn't sleep. I watched the ceiling shadows shift with passing cars. Questions circled like moths. Who sent it? Why now? Was this the someone else Elaine had hinted about? Or a trap meant to rattle me back into anger? At dawn, I opened the window and let the early air in. Birds were already shouting their small joy into the morning. I smiled because they didn't worry about being heard. They just sang. In the weeks that followed, I kept living small, reading to children at the library, tending herbs on the balcony, baking bread that made the apartment smell like comfort. But beneath that calm rhythm, something new pulsed, a quiet readiness. I was not hiding anymore. I was preparing. One Saturday, the phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct made me answer. A woman's voice said my name softly, as if testing it. Then she said, I think we worked together once. I need to talk to you about the reports. My pulse quickened. I stepped to the window, watching rain streak the glass, and said, I'm listening. She hesitated, then whispered, They made me sign something I didn't understand. I think you should know what's coming. My hand gripped the curtain edge. What's coming? I asked. There was a pause, the kind that stretches time thin. Then she said, A review. Official. And your name. It's back in the files. The line went dead. I stood there, the dial tone humming like a faraway engine, knowing that invisibility had served its purpose. The world was beginning to notice I was gone, and that was the first step toward being truly seen again. But I also knew this. When buried things rise, they don't return alone. Something else was moving beneath the surface, something that could rewrite the story entirely, and I was ready to watch it unfold. The phone call replayed in my mind for days, like an echo trapped in a hallway. Your name, it's back in the files. Those words had weight. They pressed on my chest each morning while I stirred sugar into coffee. I didn't rush to find out what they meant. I had learned that truth often reveals itself more clearly to those who wait than to those who chase it. Still, a quiet current of energy began to run beneath my calm. I spent mornings in the library, my safe corner near the tall window, reviewing my old notebooks. They were filled with fragments, dates, signatures, odd remarks, and numbers that never matched. I started noticing connections I had missed before. When you step back from a tapestry of betrayal, the pattern becomes almost elegant. I wrote a heading across one new page. Seeds. Below it, I listed every small act that had felt meaningless at the time. An overlooked email, a misplaced file, a sudden change in leadership. Each event alone was nothing. Together, they whispered a story no one had wanted to hear. That week, I decided to visit Elaine. Her small cottage sat on the edge of town, with ivy climbing up its sides like gentle persistence. She greeted me at the door with the kind of hug that knows pain without needing to ask. We shared tea, and I told her about the flash drive, the documents, the call. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. You're not crazy, she said. They were rewriting history. It happens quietly, and most people never know because they stop looking. Her calm steadied me. She leaned forward. You have proof now. But remember, proof without patience can destroy you faster than lies ever could. She gave me a small smile. Let the truth do the talking. You just keep collecting. That night, back home, I laid everything out on the table. Notes, printed reports, copies from the flash drive. The sight of it made me uneasy and powerful at once. I organized everything into folders labeled by month. As I worked, I realized that my story wasn't just about being fired. It was about being erased. And maybe, just maybe, about writing myself back in. Days turned into weeks. My routines kept me sane. Mornings in the park, afternoons at the library, evenings cataloging small truths. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like an archivist of my own life. Then, one quiet Thursday, while shelving returned books, I heard a voice behind me. "You still alphabetize by instinct, don't you?" I turned. It was Dana, one of my former co-workers, holding a worn paperback. Her smile was nervous. "I heard you left," she said softly. "Or were made to leave." I nodded. She hesitated, glancing around. "Can we talk outside?" We sat on a bench under the oak trees. She fidgeted with the book in her lap. "They're rebranding," she began. "New leadership, new image. And they're using your system, the one you built. They're presenting it as the cornerstone of the company's comeback." My heart didn't break. It folded quietly, like paper in rain. She continued, "I didn't know until I saw the internal memo. They changed the dates and signatures, but I recognized your layout, your code names, even your phrasing." I looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" She swallowed hard. "Because I can't sleep, and because someone inside still cares about what's right." Before I could reply, she slipped a small envelope into my bag. "These are copies," she whispered. "Keep them safe. I shouldn't even have them." She stood quickly, her eyes glossy. "Be careful, okay? They won't like that you still exist." When I got home, I opened the envelope. Inside were internal emails, threads of conversations between upper management. They discussed the system rollout, congratulated each other, and joked about burying the original source. I read them twice, each line sharpening my resolve. I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt something stronger, clarity. I realized revenge wasn't the opposite of forgiveness. Silence was. My silence had made them comfortable. My calm would now make them visible. That night, I called Elaine. "I have more proof," I said. Her voice on the other end was steady. "Then it's time to decide what story you want told. One of bitterness or one of balance?" "Balance," I said without hesitation. "Good," she said. "Then keep your tone clean. No fire, no poison. The truth burns bright enough without matches." After the call, I couldn't sleep. I stood at the window, moonlight cutting across the floor, and thought about all the women I had known who were told to move on instead of speak up. We were always expected to disappear gracefully. But disappearing isn't the same as surrendering. It's just the art of waiting until the ground is ready for what you planted. I went to the desk, opened my notebook again, and wrote a new heading, Plan. Beneath it, I listed steps, not revenge but restoration. Step 1, protect my records. Step 2, reach out to a trusted contact outside the company. Step 3, write the truth as a report, not a confession. As I wrote, I felt something shift inside, a kind of peace that comes when fear finally recognizes its own exhaustion. The next morning, while cleaning up, I noticed a slip of paper under my front door. It had been pushed from outside. On it was a handwritten note. "They know you're talking to Elaine." My hands went cold. I stepped onto the porch. No one in sight, just the quiet street and a stray leaf tumbling across the pavement. I closed the door slowly, heart steady, but aware that the silence around me had changed. Someone had noticed the seeds I was planting. I gathered my notes, sealed them in an envelope, and placed them inside a small safe I kept for sentimental things. It wasn't fear that guided me, it was instinct. When you start telling the truth, shadows tend to move. That night, I sat in darkness, only the hum of the fridge keeping me company. I thought about the message, the call, the flash drive, the papers. None of it felt accidental. Truth, I realized, has its own gravity. It pulls what it needs closer, even when you're standing still. I picked up my pen, wrote a single sentence across a fresh page. "They think I'm alone." Then I smiled faintly. Let them think so. Because in the dark, where seeds sleep unseen, roots were already forming. And soon, they would break through the surface, reaching for light that no lie could hide. But before that day arrived, I would learn that truth doesn't just reveal. It rearranges, And the next message I received would prove just how deep those roots had grown. I began writing letters I never planned to send. It felt old-fashioned, like washing porcelain after dinner. I used thick paper and a simple pen. No flourishes, no anger. Each letter spoke to someone who had touched the story, as if we were across a small table with time for truth. Truly. The first letter was to myself. I wrote, "You are not the worst thing they said, nor the best thing you once believed. You are a woman who did her work with care." I folded it and placed it in the back of my notebook. Then I wrote to the young analyst who replaced me. I thanked her for staying late, for her good questions. I said I hoped she would never be asked to sign something that made her smaller. I did not accuse her. I let the letter hold space for her courage. I wrote to my old manager and kept the language clean. I listed 3 facts with dates and attachments. I did not mention the jokes or the side glances or the quiet erasing of my name. A woman can know what was done and still choose not to swing the knife back. I sealed that letter and put it away with the others. After a week of what I would not send, my hand grew patient. My voice found a tone both soft and unbreakable. The letters were not forgiveness. They were clarity. When the time came to send one, my words would not shake. One evening, Elaine called. "How's the quiet?" she asked. "Teaching me to write like water," I said. She chuckled. "Good. Water, smooth stone without shouting." I told her about the envelope under my door, the flash drive, and Dana. Elaine listened, then said, "There's someone you should meet. She separates noise from proof. Who is she?" I asked. "She's an internal auditor who still sleeps well. Her name is Miriam. She left 2 years before me and is allergic to shortcuts. I'll send an introduction. You can choose whether to respond." The email arrived with a promise. Introduction only, no expectation. Miriam's reply was a single paragraph. She did not ask for gossip. She asked politely if I would share dates, public documents, and anything I had permission to disclose. She added, "If your story is not ready, I will honor that." Respect can be a kind of medicine. I drafted one to Miriam, careful and calm. I attached nothing. I described what I had, how it came, and where I was unsure. I said I was not seeking revenge or money. I wanted a clean record and the safety of those who might be asked to sign what they did not understand. Before I pressed send, I made tea and read the letter aloud. The words sounded like a woman I could trust. I clicked send and let the kitchen go quiet. Days passed. I did not pace. I baked bread and gave the neighbor half a loaf. I sorted herb jars and wrote labels in tidy print. When anger rose, I walked until my feet grew quiet. On Sunday morning, Miriam replied, "Thank you for your care," she wrote. "I can meet Thursday at 10 in a public place of your choosing. Bring only what you are comfortable sharing. I will bring a small notebook." Thursday arrived like a clear sheet of paper. I chose a cafe with large windows. Miriam was already there, writing with a pencil. She stood when I arrived and offered her hand the way people do when they are not in a hurry to take anything from you. We ordered coffee. I placed a slim folder on the table. Inside were copies of public items, emails through company servers, reports with dates, and the flash drive material printed without signatures. Miriam did not rush. She read one page at a time, sometimes nodding, sometimes underlining with her pencil. When she finished, she looked at me with kind seriousness. "You have been careful," she said. "That will matter more than you know." "I don't want to break anyone," I told her. "I want the truth to breathe." Miriam closed the folder. "Then we are in agreement. I will not move without your consent, but I will ask a question you can refuse. Are you willing to let this leave your hands if it means the story will be told clearly and you may never be thanked for it?" I thought of the thank you cards on my table, of long nights, steady mornings, and the river that listened when I had no one else. "Yes," I said. "I am willing." "Good," she said. Clean truth often travels without credit. We met twice more in quiet places. Each meeting ended with a simple plan. What to include, what to set aside, what to verify twice. I gave her permission to carry the folder to a certain office where honesty still had a desk. On the day the folder left my hands, I felt lighter and sad at once. It is tender to let go of your own defense. I walked home through rain and told myself the weather was washing the path clear. That evening, my phone buzzed with a number I did not know. I almost let it ring out, but answered. A woman's voice said my name. "This is Margaret from compliance," she said. "We received a package this afternoon. I would like to ask you some questions." My heart did not race. It steadied. "Of course," I said. She paused. "Not now, tomorrow, and not here. There is a room we use when truth needs quiet." The line clicked. A message followed with an address I recognized and a time that felt like a held breath. The letters I never meant to send had carried me to a doorway I could not ignore, and the next step would change what everyone thought they knew. The next morning felt heavier than usual, as if the world already knew what was about to begin. I dressed simply, soft gray sweater, dark jeans, hair tied back. No makeup, no armor, just the face that had learned the difference between fear and readiness. The address Margaret had sent was in the older part of the city, a stone building with long corridors and quiet elevators. The air smelled faintly of paper and time. When I reached the third floor, a woman at reception looked up and smiled without curiosity. "Room 307, she said, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the room was plain. A table, 2 chairs, a small recorder on the edge. Margaret entered a minute later, a woman in her 50s, kind eyes, measured steps. She greeted me with respect, not suspicion. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We'll talk about what you've already shared, nothing beyond that." "I've reviewed the files Miriam delivered," I nodded. "Then you know they aren't just mine." "I do," she said, sitting opposite me. "You're not the only person who has spoken." That surprised me. "Someone else?" "Yes," she said. "More than one." It took a moment for her words to settle. I had imagined myself as the last light flickering in a closed room, but somewhere out there, others were also tired of the dark. We talked for an hour. I answered each question calmly, sticking to dates and details. Margaret took notes, occasionally looking up with quiet admiration. When we finished, she said, "This will take time, but it has begun. You should prepare for silence before sound. That's how ripples start. Small, slow, certain." When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face and the wind carried a hint of spring. I realized I hadn't truly noticed the season in months. Change was coming. I stopped by the park on my way home. Children were feeding ducks, laughter scattering like seeds. For the first time since that Tuesday I vanished, I felt part of the living world again. The following days unfolded softly. I didn't hear back from Margaret or Miriam. That was fine. Some truths need distance to breathe. I kept my routines, wrote in my notebook, and waited without expectation. Then, one evening, while I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed. It was Dana. I hadn't heard from her since the envelope. Her message was brief. "You should see the company's homepage." My hands shook slightly as I typed the address. The page loaded with new colors, new slogans, new leadership photos. But below, in smaller print, was a line that stopped my breath. Based on original internal systems developed in prior years by the foundational team. No names. No ownership. Just an acknowledgement that history hadn't begun with their deceit. It was small, but it was a crack in the wall, a first ripple. I sat there for a long moment, staring at that single sentence. Gratitude, relief, disbelief, all tangled together. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then my phone rang again. It was Elaine. "You saw it?" she asked, her voice alive with quiet joy. "I did," I said. "It's not everything, but it's something." "It's the start," she said. "Ripples grow when you don't chase them." That night, I wrote another letter I didn't send. This one was to the woman I had been months ago, the one sitting in her car outside the office, clutching the dismissal paper. I wrote, you didn't vanish. You transformed. You left the noise and found the echo that mattered." As I finished writing, my phone buzzed with a notification, an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject: "A thank you from someone still inside." I hesitated, then opened it. "You don't know me, but I know what you did. Your calm saved more than one of us. The truth is moving quietly like you taught it to. Don't stop believing it matters." I closed my eyes. The words felt like warmth traveling through glass. For months I had worked in silence, unsure if my stillness made any difference. But now here was proof, a voice from the other side of the wall. The next morning, I went to the park again. Same bench, same trees, same gentle wind. But I felt taller somehow, not in pride but in peace. I realized revenge had never been the goal. Redemption was. Yet peace never comes without its own tests. That afternoon, a blocked number called. I answered, expecting another ripple. But this time the voice wasn't kind. "You think this is over?" the man said quietly. "It isn't." The line went dead before I could reply. For a moment, the world shrank to a pulse in my ear. But instead of fear, something older filled me, a steadiness that had survived every loss. I whispered to the empty line, "Then you don't know me at all." I hung up, locked the door, and stood by the window, watching the wind stir the branches. Each leaf moved in its own direction, but together they made a single sound, like truth finding its rhythm. That night, I sat at my desk and opened a blank page. On the top, I wrote one line in steady ink. "The ripple has reached the shore, but the tide is still coming." Then I closed the notebook, knowing the story wasn't finished yet, but that the next wave would be louder than the first. Now tell me, if this happened to you, would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken, even if no one promised to listen? Share it below. I truly want to know your answer. The morning after the blocked call, I opened every window and let cool air travel through the rooms. Fear likes closed spaces. I would not give it shelter. The curtains breathed in and out like quiet lungs. I smiled, not because I felt brave, but because I felt awake. I brewed coffee and set 2 cups on the table out of habit. The second cup was for the part of me that still needed comfort. We do not always need answers. We need company. While the kettle hummed, I wrote a list called Steady Things. Walk, stretch, water the basil, call Elaine, write 1 clean paragraph, eat something warm. Sometimes strength is just keeping promises to yourself in a quiet kitchen. Elaine picked up on the second ring. I told her about the threat. She listened the way a lighthouse listens, present, unshaken. "Good," she said. "It means the wind has changed. When truth moves, bluster pretends to be thunder. Let it pass. Keep your compass. Do I need a lawyer?" I asked. "You need records, rest, and witnesses," she said gently. "You already have all 3. If counsel becomes wise, we'll know. For now, let patience work." After we hung up, I walked by the river. The water was higher than last week, its surface cut with small silver ripples. A man tossed crumbs to gulls that argued over each piece. I thought about the first ripple on the company page. It was not an apology. It was not credit. But it was motion, and motion becomes current. Back home, an email from Margaret waited. Subject, next steps. She scheduled a follow-up for Wednesday. "We will speak to several parties in sequence," she wrote. "Please avoid contacting anyone involved. Your composure aids the process more than you know." I stood at the window. Composure was not silence. It was choosing tone. It was letting the wind push from behind instead of shouting against it. I whispered, wind at my back, just to hear it aloud. The week stretched long and thin. I kept to the steady things list as if it were a small raft. At the library, Mrs. Patel asked for a large print novel. We spent 20 minutes comparing covers, then laughed because neither of us could find our glasses. Tuesday evening, Dana texted, "I may be asked questions. If they call me, I will tell the truth." I wrote back, "Thank you. Do only what is safe." She replied, "Watching." Watching can be a kind of courage, too. Wednesday came. I wore my gray sweater again, a ritual of continuity. In room 307, Margaret greeted me with a nod. Another woman sat at the corner of the table, dark hair, a neat notebook. "This is Julia," Margaret said. "She assists with documentation." We reviewed what I had given. Julia's questions were precise: sequence, timing, recipients. She sometimes repeated my words to be sure. When we finished, Margaret turned off the recorder and exhaled. "I want you to hear this before rumors try to reach you," she said. "A few leaders have stepped aside quietly. Titles are shifting. There will be announcements." Sorrow came before satisfaction. Power changing hands does not mend harm, but it opens a window. What about people who signed things they didn't understand? I asked. We're speaking to them, she said, carefully. Outside, thin rain felt kind on my face. The city looked rinsed. I bought a loaf from the corner bakery. The man added 2 small rolls wrapped in paper. For the walk home, he said. That evening, I sorted a small stack of photographs. In one, I was 25, laughing with my head thrown back, not yet careful with joy. I touched the glossy edge. Come back, I told her. Just the part that believed mornings were gifts. Thursday, Miriam emailed. She would be out of reach for a few days. Don't be alarmed, she wrote. Ordinary work with extraordinary timing. I smiled at the phrase. I baked a pie and took half to Mr. Hayes. He told me about his late wife's apple tarts. We spoke about crusts and patience, 2 skills that seem unrelated until life requires both. As I left, he said, You have the look of a sailor who has learned the wind. Keep it. Friday I woke before dawn. I made tea and sat by the window. The sky a gentle slate. I wrote a promise at the top of my notebook. I will not let other people's noise decide my volume. The words felt right. I watched the edge of light grow. By noon, a message found me from a familiar name I couldn't place. Subject, quiet help. It read, They are preparing a statement. It will mention legacy contributions. Check the internal blog at 4. Waiting can stretch a minute like taffy. At 4, the blog updated. The words were careful, almost timid. We acknowledge foundational work across multiple years by a dedicated team whose efforts shaped current systems. Again, no names. Another crack wider. Comments were closed. I texted Elaine. Wind is rising. She replied, Yes, keep your feet. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I dreamed of walking the river with my younger self. She linked her arm through mine and matched my pace. We watched the water carry leaves toward somewhere they belonged. Morning brought a calm apartment and a quieter heart. I watered the basil and opened the windows wide. The curtains lifted, soft and certain. The wind was at my back. The phone rang. A number from long ago shimmered on the screen. A name I had not said since before the firing. I let it pulse once more, then answered. My grip tightened on it. Hello? I said, voice steady, a pause. Then that familiar voice, careful now. I think we should meet. There are things you need to see, and they're not coming from inside the company. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the voice I had not heard since that Tuesday afternoon, the one who once smiled as she slid the termination letter across the desk. Her tone was different now, the edge dulled by something that sounded almost like regret. I know you have no reason to trust me, she said, but what's happening inside isn't what they're telling you. There are files being moved, things being rewritten again. If you still have your copies, keep them safe. My heart beat slowly, almost deliberately. Why are you calling me now? She sighed, the sound of someone who had stopped pretending to be proud. Because it's going to come out anyway. I'd rather not be on the wrong side of it. There was silence. Then she added softly, I shouldn't be saying this, but someone's trying to make sure you disappear a second time. The line clicked dead. For a long time, I didn't move. The kitchen clock ticked on, patient and indifferent. Then, instinct taking over, I gathered every file, every note, and sealed them in a brown envelope. I didn't hide it. I mailed it to Elaine's address with no return name. I trusted her to keep it safe if things turned rough. By evening, a heavy rain had started, the kind that scrubs the world clean, but makes every shadow feel alive. I closed the curtains and sat by the window, watching the reflections of passing cars slide across the glass like restless ghosts. It felt like the pause before a storm breaks, a stillness so sharp it hums. I thought about the call, about her voice. The woman who once smiled through my undoing was now warning me. Maybe guilt can grow in even the most well-kept hearts, or maybe fear teaches truth better than conscience ever could. The night stretched long. I brewed tea I didn't drink, scrolled through old photos I didn't want to see, and finally, just before midnight, opened my laptop to write. Not a letter. Not a report. A record. I wrote everything again from memory. The call, the tone, every word. I added it to a digital folder titled After the Rain, password protected and stored in the cloud. I sent one copy to myself with a time delay. If anything happened to me, it would send automatically. It sounds dramatic, but when you've lived through quiet erasure once, you learn to build echoes that can't be silenced. The clock hit 2 a.m. I was still awake. My mind wandered to the day I first walked into that company years ago. Fresh hope, new shoes, the smell of printer ink. I had believed work could be a kind of family. Now I knew better. Families forgive. Corporations archive. Somewhere around dawn, I dozed off on the couch. When I woke, pale light spilled across the floor, and an email notification blinked on my phone. The subject line was chillingly familiar. Unauthorized material removal. I opened it. A message from the company's legal department, written in their usual polite threat. Please be advised that proprietary documents have been located in external storage under your name. We request confirmation of deletion within 48 hours to avoid escalation. I read it twice. They wanted me to erase the truth, neatly, quietly, as if cleaning dust from a shelf. I smiled, a small, tired smile. They were late. By noon, Elaine called. Got your package, she said calmly. I made duplicates. The originals are already somewhere safe. Let them send whatever they like, I exhaled. They sent the usual threat. I expected it, she said. It means they're worried, not certain. Worry is the first sign that arrogance is cracking. That afternoon, I received another message. This one from Margaret. Hold your position, it read. Formal review advancing. Do not reply to any external communication. Her words steadied me. I brewed coffee, watched the steam twist upward like invisible handwriting. The day outside was clear and cold. I stepped out to the balcony and felt the air on my face. It carried that strange energy cities have right before something changes. Anticipation disguised as normal life. Evening came quietly. I wrote in my notebook. Sometimes truth crawls. Sometimes it runs. Tonight, it's learning to fly. Later, the phone buzzed again. Another blocked number. My pulse jumped, but I answered anyway. This time, no voice spoke. Only breathing, slow and deliberate. Then click. Silence. I sat back, strangely calm. Fear was an old visitor now. It no longer startled me. I picked up the notebook and wrote, They can't scare a woman who has already lost everything that wasn't real. Then, a second buzz. This time a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have sent those files. I stared at it, then placed the phone face down. The wind outside picked up, rustling the leaves in small, urgent bursts. The world had learned my name again, but not the way it expected. I went to the window, pressed my palm against the glass. Streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement. Somewhere out there, people were walking dogs, cooking dinners, living ordinary lives. I had once wanted nothing more than that kind of quiet normal, but now I understood that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the decision not to let the noise own you. The rain started again, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. I whispered, I hear you, but I'm not afraid. In the distance, thunder rolled, low and promising. I felt it in my chest, a reminder that storms don't only destroy, they also cleanse. Before going to bed, I opened my inbox one last time. A new message had arrived, no sender listed. Just a subject line. They opened the audit. I read it 3 times, my heart still but my skin alive with the electricity of what those words meant. The long night was over. Dawn was coming, and with it, the truth that could no longer be buried. The morning the audit went public began like any other. I woke to the sound of birds stitching their songs into the gray light and the smell of coffee drifting through the apartment. The city outside was still half asleep, unaware that truth was already moving quietly through its wires. At 8:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. The review is live. Check your email before the news does. For a long moment, I just stood there, cup in hand, watching the steam curl up and vanish. Then I opened my inbox. There it was. An internal memo forwarded from Miriam. Subject line, Finding Summary. I clicked. The first line read, After a comprehensive review, it has been determined that several foundational systems were misattributed during the 2021 restructuring period. My name appeared twice, once in a list of contributors, and again in a section labeled Original Development Records. No embellishment, no drama, just plain recognition, printed in the same neutral font that had once erased me. I stared at the words until they blurred. I didn't cry. It wasn't the kind of victory that calls for tears. It was quiet, like returning home to find the light still on. Elaine called. Her voice trembled with a smile. "They finally spelled it right," she said. I laughed softly. "After all this time," she paused. "Do you feel free?" I looked out the window, the morning sunlight finally finding the corners of my living room. "Not free," I said, "but whole. That's better." Within hours, the memo spread beyond its intended circle. Someone leaked it. Or maybe truth simply refused to stay hidden any longer. Articles appeared with headlines like, "Former employees' work restored after internal inquiry." My phone lit up with messages, some from old colleagues, some from strangers who had followed whispers of my story online. Most said the same thing. "You did it." But I hadn't done it alone. Truth had done it, carried by quiet hands and tired hearts that decided enough was enough. I spent the rest of the day answering only one message. Dana's. She wrote, "We read it together this morning." The room was silent. No one knew what to say. I replied, "Silence is how guilt breathes. Let it choke itself out." That evening I walked by the river again. The water was high, shimmering with late sunlight. Each ripple looked like a memory set free. I thought about the first time I came here after being fired. Sitting on that same bench, promising myself not to harden. Now I knew what that promise meant. It meant trusting that dignity is not weakness. It's endurance. As I sat, a man approached, tall, wearing a raincoat though the sky was clear. He stopped a few feet away. "You're her, aren't you?" he asked. I hesitated. "Depends who you mean." The woman from the report. "The one they tried to erase." I nodded. He smiled, tired but genuine. "I was in logistics back then. I signed things I didn't understand. I'm sorry." I studied his face. "Regret makes even strangers look familiar." "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "Just do better with your next signature." He nodded, eyes glistening. "We will." When he left, I sat alone again, listening to the water against the rocks. It didn't sound like victory. It sounded like peace wearing a humble face. The following morning, Margaret emailed again. "Media will ask for comment," she wrote. "You have the right to speak, but silence can be its own headline." I thought about that for hours. I drafted a statement. Brief, gentle, final. I'm grateful the record reflects the truth. I wish everyone still there the courage to keep it that way. I sent it, closed my laptop, and went for a walk. The air felt new, as if the world had taken one long exhale. I passed a bakery, bought a small loaf, and shared it with a stray dog that followed me for a block before deciding freedom smelled better elsewhere. When I reached the park, the trees were shedding the last of their leaves. Change doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it falls quietly at your feet. I picked up a single leaf, golden, veined, perfect, and pressed it between the pages of my notebook when I returned home. That night, I sat by the window again, tea cooling beside me, and thought about the word justice. It isn't as loud as revenge. It doesn't walk in with banners and applause. Justice, real justice, moves softly, like dawn, like forgiveness, like wind passing through open doors. At 9:03 p.m., a new email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. It had no subject line, just a single attachment. A photo. It showed a boardroom, my old office, chairs pushed back, projector glowing. On the screen, my original presentation slide. At the bottom corner, my name. The caption beneath it read, "They used it today. No one dared take it down." I sat there staring at the photo, the sound of my own heartbeat steady in my ears. I felt no gloating, no triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally finished a long, unfinished sentence. And yet, as I closed the laptop, I couldn't shake one thought. If the doors had opened for me, what else was waiting to step through? Because truth never travels alone. Once it finds daylight, it carries others with it, the unseen, the unheard. The next names waiting to be remembered. Outside, the wind rose again, gentle but insistent, brushing against the glass like a reminder. The doors were open now, but something, or someone, was about to walk in. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope, the kind used for ceremonies rather than apologies. The letterhead carried the company's logo, small and unassuming, as if embarrassed by its own history. It said, "We are hosting a private recognition event for contributors to our foundational systems. Your attendance would honor us." Honor us. The phrase made me smile, quietly, the way one smiles when someone finally learns to pronounce a truth they once refused to hear. I didn't answer right away. I left the envelope on the kitchen counter beside my half-drunk tea, watching how sunlight slid across it hour by hour. There was a part of me that wanted to throw it away, to let silence speak for me one last time. But another part, the calmer, older voice that had guided me through months of storms, whispered, "Go, not for them. For you." So I went. The event was held in the same glass building where I had once lost my job, the same revolving doors, same smell of new carpet and ambition. But the faces were different. Fewer smiles that bit, more that bent with fatigue. I walked through the lobby with the strange confidence of someone who has nothing left to prove. At the registration table, a young man glanced at my name tag, then at me. His eyes widened slightly. "Oh," he said softly. "It's you," I nodded. "It's me." Inside, the main hall shimmered with polite laughter and the dull clink of glasses. On the stage stood a large screen looping images of company milestones. I recognized my own slides, the ones that once carried someone else's name. Now they were unedited, my handwriting on the graphs clear even from a distance. For a long moment I stood there watching it all. The irony, the justice, the symmetry. Then someone tapped my shoulder. It was Dana, eyes bright but cautious. "They told me you might come," she said. "I wasn't sure I would." "I'm glad you did," she whispered. "People need to see the woman behind the story." I wanted to say something brave or profound, but words felt unnecessary. So instead I reached for her hand and squeezed it lightly. "Thank you," I said, "for telling the truth when it wasn't convenient." She smiled. "You taught me that silence is not peace." Across the room, I noticed her, the woman who had once fired me. She was standing near the buffet, posture impeccable, face unreadable. For a moment, our eyes met. She looked away first. Margaret appeared beside me, her calm presence grounding as always. "We thought you should be here," she said. Not for their applause, for the record. "I'm not sure I need either," I said. "Perhaps," she replied, "but history does." The lights dimmed. A man in a dark suit walked to the microphone and began to speak about innovation, integrity, resilience, the words that corporations borrow when they need to sound human. Then he gestured toward a group of us near the front. "These individuals," he said, "laid the groundwork for what we have today. Their early vision and dedication shaped the systems that now define our success." Applause rose, warm but restrained. I felt eyes turn toward me, curious, perhaps respectful. I bowed my head slightly, not out of humility, but to honor the version of myself who had once left this place with nothing but a paper and her dignity. Afterward, people approached in small waves, handshakes, polite smiles, fragments of apology disguised as compliments. I accepted them all with grace, letting none of it reach too deep. Forgiveness doesn't require trust. Sometimes it's just refusing to carry the weight any longer. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. An older man I didn't recognize stepped forward. "Ms." He paused, glancing at my name tag again. "I read your documentation. I'm overseeing the transparency report next quarter. I want you to know, it's already changing how we verify authorship." He extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the faint tremor of sincerity. "Make it count," I said. As the evening wound down, the crowd thinned until only a few remained. The woman who had fired me lingered near the exit. When I turned to leave, she stepped closer. Her voice was low, careful. "I suppose this is where I say I'm sorry," she said. "But that sounds smaller than what happened." I looked at her, really looked. Not the polished exterior, but the human beneath it. "You don't have to say it," I said softly. "Just mean it," she nodded once. "I do." We stood there, 2 women framed by years of choices. Then she said something unexpected. "You were right to go quiet. You were louder than any of us." I smiled faintly. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. It just means I was listening. When I stepped out into the night, the air smelled of rain and city light. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft sigh, like a chapter ending itself. I walked down the steps slowly, each one echoing a little less than the one before. Halfway down, I turned back for one last glance at the building. Through the windows, I could see them talking, heads bent close, words whispered over champagne. For the first time, their whispers didn't sting. They were only echoes now, trapped inside walls I no longer belonged to. I walked toward the streetlights, the sound of traffic rising like an orchestra warming up. My reflection followed me in every window, familiar but lighter. The city didn't look like the enemy anymore. It looked like possibility. And then, as I reached the corner, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It read, "They're asking who else knew. Should I tell them about me?" I stopped walking, thumb hovering above the screen. The question was simple, but its answer carried the weight of every quiet act of courage that had brought me here. Because this wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about the next person standing at the edge of the same silence, wondering if they should step forward. And the choice I made next would decide whether truth ended with me or began again. Months passed, and the story that had once consumed me began to loosen its grip. The headlines faded, the articles moved to archives, and the city found new stories to chase. Yet in small corners of my days, the echoes still lingered. Quiet reminders that truth, once spoken, never fully goes back to sleep. I returned to a rhythm that felt human again. Mornings meant coffee and soft radio music. I volunteered at the library more often, teaching a writing class on Saturdays. The faces around me were kind, lined with experience. We wrote about memory, about loss, about the moments that remake us. I told them, "You don't need to shout your story for it to matter. You just need to live it truthfully." Sometimes after class, an older woman would stay behind to talk. One told me she'd been forced out of her job at 55. Another whispered that she'd signed something she didn't understand. I listened, nodded, and saw in their eyes the same exhaustion I once carried. And in every voice, I heard a small ember of hope. That ember was enough. Elaine visited one Sunday, bringing her usual calm and a basket of oranges. She looked around my apartment, now lighter, plants thriving in every corner, and said, "You've built something steady." "I've built something small," I corrected gently. She smiled. Small can hold a lot of peace. We sat on the balcony as the sun dipped low. She told me she was retiring for good. "I'll spend my mornings gardening, my afternoons ignoring news," she said. "But I wanted to see you one more time before disappearing properly." I squeezed her hand. "You taught me that disappearing isn't the same as giving up." She looked at me with that lighthouse steadiness I'd come to rely on. "You proved it," she said. "You turned silence into direction." When she left, I stood at the door watching her walk away, the same woman who'd once handed me courage disguised as advice. It felt like watching a tide recede, grateful, inevitable, right? A week later, I received an email from Dana. The company had announced new ethics protocols, mandatory transparency sessions, and something called the Quiet Resolve Initiative. She wrote, "They named it after you, though they won't admit it." I laughed until tears blurred the screen. The next few months unfolded with gentle ordinariness. I took long walks by the river, the same path that had first taught me to breathe again. The trees were heavier now with spring leaves, their branches shading the water. Children played nearby, their laughter bright as sunlight through glass. The world had kept turning, and for once I didn't feel left behind. Sometimes I still thought of that night, the rain, the phone calls, the breath on the line. I wondered who had sent that final message asking, "Should I tell them about me?" I never replied. Maybe they found their own voice. Maybe that was the point all along, that truth travels through people, not around them. Margaret sent one final note in early summer. The review had closed officially. Records corrected, systems stabilized, Legacy acknowledged, she wrote. Then, a line that made me smile. The doors stayed open. I printed that email and pinned it above my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that justice is not a single act. It's a long, slow series of steady hands keeping the door from closing again. One afternoon, I returned to the glass building for the last time. Not for meetings, not for ceremonies, just to look. The security guard recognized me and waved. I smiled back, walked past the lobby, and stood in front of the large display screen that once looped my work. It was blank now, waiting for something new. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and whispered, "I forgive you, but I don't forget me." Then I turned and walked away, leaving no shadow behind. The sun followed me out onto the street. I stopped at a cafe I'd never visited before, ordered tea, and sat by the window. Across from me, a young woman in a suit was reading documents, her brows furrowed in quiet frustration. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled nervously. I smiled back, the kind of smile that says, "You'll be okay," because she would. Because we all can be. As I finished my tea, I wrote one final line in my notebook, the same one that had carried me from despair to daylight. You can lose everything that isn't real and still find yourself whole. Then, underneath, I added, the end of one story is just the echo of another beginning. I closed the notebook, stood and stepped out into the golden evening. The air was soft, the wind gentle against my face, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I looked up at the sky, wide, forgiving, infinite, and smiled, because at last, I wasn't vanishing anymore. I was simply living, and that was enough.